Today's story is called Trump versus the World, the Trade War Explained. Chapter 1. The Start of Trouble. Canada and the United States are very close. They share a long border, and many people travel between the two countries every day. They buy and sell a lot of things to each other. This is called trade. Trade is important because it helps both countries make money and have access to different products. For example, the United States buys oil from Canada, and Canada buys cars from the United States. For many years, things have been good between the two countries when it comes to trade, but now something is changing. The government in the United States decided that they wanted to change the rules about trade with Canada. The new rule is about taxes. When things are sent from one country to another to be sold, sometimes the government of the country that is buying the goods charges a tax. This tax is called a tariff. The government says they will charge this tariff on many things that come from Canada. This means that anything from Canada that is sold in the United States will now cost more money. Think about it like this. Imagine you want to buy a toy that is made in Canada. Before the new rule, the toy might cost $10 in a store in the United States. But now, because of the tariff, the store has to pay extra money to the government when the toy comes from Canada. The store will then probably increase the price of the toy so that they still make money. So the same toy might now cost $12. The government in Canada is not happy about this. They think it is not fair that the United States is making things from Canada more expensive. They feel like the United States is trying to hurt Canadian businesses. The new tariff could mean that people in the United States will not buy as many things from Canada because they are now more expensive. This could mean that Canadian businesses will make less money, and some people in Canada could even lose their job. Because they are unhappy with the new rule from the United States, Canada decides to do the same thing. They will also put tariffs on things that come from the United States. Now, things from the United States will cost more money in Canada. For example, imagine you want to buy a book that is written and printed in the United States. Before this new rule, the book might cost $15 in a bookstore in Canada. But now, because of the tariff, the bookstore will have to pay extra money to the Canadian government when the book comes from the United States. The bookstore will probably increase the price of the book so that they still make money. So, the same book might now cost $17. The leader of Canada, who is called the Prime Minister, talks about this problem to the people of Canada. He is worried about what is happening. He says, "This is like a fight between our two countries, but it is a fight about trade. We call it a trade war. We don't want this fight, but we have to protect Canadian businesses and Canadian jobs." This book is going to explain what trade wars are and why they happen. Trade wars are not simple. They are very complicated. It is often difficult to say who is right and who is wrong when countries start putting tariffs on each other's goods. We will look at the different sides of the story. We will try to understand why countries do this and what happens when they do. Tariffs are a very important part of trade wars. It is a tax that is paid on goods that come from other countries. The tariff is added to the price of the good. This makes the goods more expensive. Tariffs are not new. Countries have used tariffs for many years. Sometimes they are used to protect their own businesses. Sometimes they are used to punish other countries. Many years ago, there were some very high tariffs in the world. These tariffs made trade problems even worse, and they made life very difficult for many people. In this book, we will try to answer some important questions. Why do trade wars start? What makes countries decide to put tariffs on each other? Who wins and who loses when countries have a trade war? Does anyone really win? What happens to ordinary people? Are there other ways to solve trade problems instead of having a trade war? Can countries talk to each other and find solutions that are better for everyone? Understanding these questions is very important if we want to understand the world around us and the problems that countries face. Chapter 2. What is a trade war? To really understand a trade war, we need to learn some important words and ideas. These words will help us understand what is happening and why. Tariff. As we said before, a tariff is a tax on things that come from other countries. It's an extra cost that is added to the price of a good. Let's imagine a store in your town wants to buy toys from a factory in another country. When those toys arrive at the border, the store has to pay some extra money to the government. This extra money is the tariff. It's like a fee for bringing the toys into the country. This fee makes the toys more expensive for the store to buy, so the store might have to charge customers more money for the toys. Quota. A quota is a limit. It's like saying we will only let a certain amount of this thing come into our country. For example, a country might say, we will only allow 5,000 cars to come from another country each year. Once those 5,000 cars have come in, no more cars can be imported from that country until next year. This limit helps to protect the car companies in that country because people will have to buy cars that are made there. Quotas are another way that countries can control trade. Subsidy. A subsidy is when the government gives money to businesses in its own country. This money helps those businesses make their products more cheaply. For example, the government might give money to farmers to help them buy equipment or fertilizer. This makes it cheaper for the farmers to grow food. If the food is cheaper to grow, the farmers can sell it for a lower price. This can help them compete with farmers in other countries. Subsidies are often used to help important industries in a country. Trade deficit. A trade deficit happens when a country buys more things from other countries than it sells to them. It's like if you buy more toys than you sell. Imagine a country buys $200 million worth of clothes from other countries, but it only sells $100 million worth of clothes to other countries. That country has a trade deficit of $100 million. A trade deficit can be a sign that a country is not making enough things that other countries want to buy. Protectionism. Protectionism is when countries use tariffs, quotas, or subsidies to protect their own businesses from businesses in other countries. They want to help their own businesses grow and be successful. They might do this by making it more difficult or more expensive for people to buy things from other countries. Protectionism is a very common idea in trade wars. Free trade. Free trade is the opposite of protectionism. It means that there are no tariffs, quotas, or subsidies. Countries can buy and sell things to each other without any barriers. It's like having a big open market where everyone can trade freely. The idea behind free trade is that it helps all countries because it allows them to specialize in making the things they are best at. It also makes it cheaper for people to buy things because there are no extra costs from tariffs or quotas. Now, let's talk about some basic ideas from economics that can help us understand trade wars. Supply and demand. This is a very important idea. It says that the price of something depends on how much of it there is available, supply, and how many people want to buy it, demand. If there is a lot of something available and not many people want to buy it, the price will go down. If there is not much of something available and lots of people want to buy it, the price will go up. In trade wars, tariffs can affect supply and demand. If a country puts a tariff on a good, it makes that good more expensive. This will reduce the demand for that good because people will not want to buy as much of it. Comparative advantage. This is another important idea. It says that countries should make the things they are best at making and then trade with other countries for the things they are not so good at making. For example, one country might be very good at making cars, while another country is very good at growing food. Then, they should trade cars for food. This way, both countries can get the things they need at the lowest possible price. Tariffs directly affect prices. As we said before, a tariff makes things more expensive. Imagine there is a tariff on shoes coming from another country. This means that the price of those shoes will go up in the stores. People might decide to buy fewer shoes, or they might switch to cheaper shoes that are made in their own country. There are different arguments for and against protectionism. National security. Some people say that countries need to protect certain industries that are important for national security. For example, a country might want to protect its steel industry because steel is needed to make weapons and other military equipment. If a country depends on other countries for steel, it could be in danger if those countries become enemies. Job protection. Some people say that tariffs can protect jobs in their own country. If people buy things that are made in their own country, then companies in that country will need to hire more workers. This can help to reduce unemployment. Infant industry argument. This argument says that new industries in a country need to be protected from competition from older, more established industries in other countries. Tariffs can give these new industries time to grow and become competitive. Unfair competition. Some people say that tariffs are needed to protect their own businesses from unfair competition from other countries. For example, if another country is giving its businesses large subsidies, this can make it difficult for businesses in other countries to compete. Tariffs can help to level the playing field. However, it's important to remember that trade and trade policies are very complex. There are often different ways to look at things, and there is no single view that is always correct. Trade wars involve all of these ideas and arguments. Understanding these basic ideas is the first step to understanding what a trade war is all about. Chapter 3. Looking back at trade in history. Throughout history, there have been many times when countries have had problems with trade. These problems have sometimes led to trade wars. By looking at these examples, we can learn more about why trade wars happen and what the consequences can be. The Opium Wars in China. This is a very important example from the 1800s. Britain wanted to trade with China, especially to buy tea. Tea was very popular in Britain, and the British wanted to buy it cheaply. However, China was not very interested in buying things from Britain. The British came up with a plan to sell opium, which is a drug, to the Chinese people. Many Chinese people became addicted to opium, and the Chinese government was very worried about this. They tried to stop the British from selling opium, but the British used their powerful ships to force China to allow the opium trade. This led to the Opium Wars. China lost the wars and was forced to make trade agreements with Britain. This shows how a stronger country can use force to get what it wants in trade, even if it is harmful to the other country. The Corn Laws in Britain. In the 1800s, Britain had high taxes on imported grain, which was called corn in Britain at that time. These taxes were called the Corn Laws. The Corn Laws were meant to protect British farmers by making imported grain more expensive. However, this also meant that food was very expensive for ordinary people in Britain. Many people protested against the Corn Laws because they could not afford to buy enough food. After a long time, the British government changed the rules and allowed cheaper grain to be imported. This helped the British economy to grow and made food more affordable for people. This example shows how rules about trade can have a big impact on people's lives. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in the United States. In 1930, the United States government passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. This act raised taxes on thousands of imported goods. The goal was to protect American businesses during the Great Depression, which was a very difficult time for the American economy. However, other countries retaliated by raising their own tariffs on American goods. This led to a sharp decrease in international trade, and many economists believe that it made the Great Depression even worse. This example shows how tariffs can have unintended consequences and can harm the global economy. Japan opens up to trade. For many years, Japan followed a policy of isolationism, meaning that it did not want to trade with other countries. However, in the 1850s, ships from the United States arrived in Japan and demanded that Japan open its ports to trade. The Japanese government was reluctant to do this, but the U.S. ships were very powerful, and Japan eventually had to agree to trade with This example shows how countries can be forced to trade even if they don't want to. After World War II. After the Second World War, many countries realized that it was important to promote international cooperation and trade. They created organizations like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and later the World Trade Organization, WTO. The goal of these organizations was to reduce trade barriers and create a more level playing field for all countries. The WTO has been successful in lowering tariffs and increasing trade around the world. However, there are still many challenges to creating a fair and open trading system. From these examples, we can learn some important lessons. Trade wars can have unintended consequences. It's important to think carefully about the potential effects of tariffs and other trade barriers. Retaliation is a common response to tariffs. When one country puts tariffs on goods from another country, the other country is likely to do the same thing. This can lead to a cycle of tariffs and counter-tariffs that harms everyone. Trade is complex, and decisions about trade can have big effects on people and countries. It's important for governments to make informed decisions about trade policy. Cooperation is essential for a healthy global economy. Countries need to work together to reduce trade barriers and create a fair and open trading system. Chapter 4: Who is involved? When a trade war starts, it's not just countries that are involved. There are many different people and groups that are affected and that try to influence what happens. Understanding who these players are and what they want is important for understanding the dynamics of a trade war. Big countries. The biggest players in trade wars are usually the large, powerful countries like the United States, China, and the European Union. These countries have huge economies and trade a lot with other countries around the world. Their decisions about trade policy can have a big impact on the global economy. For example, if the United States puts tariffs on goods from China, it can affect businesses and consumers in both countries, as well as in other countries that trade with them. Other important countries. Besides the biggest players, there are also other countries that are important in trade wars, such as Canada, Mexico, and Japan. These countries have strong economies and close trade relationships with the larger countries. They can be affected by trade wars even if they are not directly involved. For example, if the United States and China are having a trade war, it can affect Canada, because Canada trades with both of those countries. Each player has different interests and goals in a trade war. The United States might want to protect its industries, such as steel, cars, and agriculture. They might use tariffs to make it more expensive for people to buy these products from other countries. This would help American businesses sell more of their own products. China might want to promote its exports and become a global economic power. They might resist tariffs that would make it more difficult for them to sell their products to other countries. The European Union might want to maintain a free and open trading system among its member countries. They might oppose tariffs that would disrupt trade within the EU. Developing countries. Developing countries can also be affected by trade wars, even though they often have less power and influence. These countries often rely on exporting raw materials or manufactured goods to richer countries. Trade wars can disrupt these exports and make it more difficult for developing countries to grow their economies. Multinational corporations. Multinational corporations, MNCs, are companies that operate in many different countries. These companies can be big players in trade wars because they can move their production and investment from one country to another to avoid tariffs or take advantage of lower costs. For example, if a company is making products in China and the United States puts tariffs on those products, the company might decide to move its production to another country, such as Vietnam or Mexico. Farmers. Farmers are often directly affected by trade wars because agricultural products are frequently targeted by tariffs. For example, if a country puts tariffs on imported soybeans, it can hurt farmers in the countries that export soybeans. This happened in the trade war between the United States and China, when China put tariffs on American soybean. Factories and workers. Factories and workers can also be affected by trade wars. Tariffs can make it more expensive for factories to import raw materials or components. This can raise their costs and make it more difficult for them to compete in global markets. Workers in those factories could lose their jobs if the factories have to close down or reduce production. Consumers. Consumers are all of us who buy things. We are often the ones who end up paying the price of trade wars because tariffs make imported goods more expensive. For example, if a country puts tariffs on imported clothing, the price of clothes in the stores will go up, and consumers will have to pay more. Sometimes, groups of people try to influence their government's trade policy. This is called lobbying. For example, companies that make steel in the US might hire lobbyists to persuade the government to put tariffs on steel from other countries. The lobbyists will argue that this will protect American jobs and help the American steel industry to thrive. Trade wars can affect different parts of the economy in different ways. For example, farming, cars, and the technology industry can all be affected by tariffs and other trade actions. Understanding who the players are and what they want is essential for understanding why trade wars happen and what the outcomes might be. It's a complicated game with many different interests at stake. Chapter 5: Understanding the Trade Rules. Imagine playing a game without any rules. It would be chaotic, wouldn't it? Everyone would be doing whatever they wanted, and it wouldn't be fair. International trade is similar. Without rules, countries could do whatever they wanted, and that could lead to unfair practices and conflict. That's why international trade needs rules. To help countries work together, make trade fair, and create a predictable system. One of the most important sets of rules comes from the World Trade Organization, WTO. Think of the WTO as a club for countries that trade with each other. Most countries in the world are members of this club. The WTO has a lot of rules about trade, including rules about tariffs, quotas, and other trade barriers. The main goal of these rules is to reduce barriers to trade and make it easier for countries to buy and sell goods and services to each other. The WTO has had some successes. It has helped to lower tariffs around the world, which has made many goods cheaper for consumers. It has also helped to increase trade between countries, which has boosted economic growth. However, the WTO also has its critics. Some people argue that the rules are not always fair, and that rich countries have more power than poor countries within the WTO. They say that the WTO rules sometimes favor the interests of big businesses over the interests of workers, consumers, and the environment. When countries disagree about trade rules, they can use the WTO's dispute settlement system. This system is like a court for trade problems. If one country believes that another country has broken the rules, it can file a complaint with the WTO. The WTO will then investigate the complaint and issue a ruling. If the WTO finds that a country has violated the rules, it can order that country to change its policies. However, it's not always easy to get countries to follow the WTO's decisions. Sometimes countries ignore the rules or find ways to get around them. This can weaken the WTO and make it less effective. There's also an ongoing debate about fair trade versus free trade. Free trade means trade without many rules or barriers. The idea is that this helps everyone by making goods cheaper and boosting economic growth. But some people argue for fair trade. They say that trade should not just be free but also fair to workers, the environment, and small businesses. They believe that free trade can sometimes hurt these things. Fair trade can mean different things to different people. Some people think it means ensuring that workers in all countries receive fair wages and work in safe conditions. Others think it means protecting local industries from foreign competition, even if it means higher prices for consumers. It's difficult to make trade completely fair for everyone. Different countries have different ideas about what constitutes fairness. It's also difficult to monitor and enforce trade rules effectively. Sometimes, countries try to protect their own industries or gain an unfair advantage in trade. This can lead to trade conflicts and disputes. International trade rules are essential for creating a stable and predictable trading system. They aim to promote open and fair trade, but the system is not perfect. There are ongoing challenges in ensuring that trade is truly fair and that all countries adhere to the rules. Finding the right balance between free trade and fair trade is a constant discussion and negotiation. Chapter 6. The Winners and Losers. Trade wars are complex events with diverse outcomes, and determining who ultimately wins and loses is a challenging task. It's not as simple as one country emerging victorious while another suffers defeat. In reality, the effects are often multifaceted, and the distribution of gains and losses is uneven. In many cases, the negative consequences of trade wars outweigh any potential benefits, making them a lose-lose situation for all involved. Consumers, who comprise the general public, often bear the brunt of trade wars. When tariffs are imposed on imported goods, these goods become more expensive for consumers. Retailers must raise prices to offset the increased costs, which ultimately translates to consumers paying more for the same products. For instance, if a country imposes tariffs on imported clothing, consumers will have to pay higher prices for clothes at department stores and online retailers. These price hikes can strain household budgets and reduce overall purchasing power. Businesses can also experience losses during trade wars. Companies that import goods face higher costs due to tariffs, which can make their products less competitive in the market. This can lead to decreased sales, reduced profits, and even job losses. For example, a company that imports car parts from another country will have to pay higher tariffs on those parts, which will increase the cost of making cars. This could force the company to raise prices or reduce production, both of which would hurt its bottom line. Small businesses are particularly vulnerable to the negative effects of trade wars. They often lack the resources and flexibility to absorb increased costs or find alternative suppliers. This can put them at a significant disadvantage compared to larger companies. Workers in certain industries might see short-term benefits during a trade war if tariffs protect local industries from foreign competition. This can lead to increased production and job creation. However, these gains are often temporary and can be offset by losses in other sectors of the economy. For example, if a country puts tariffs on imported steel, it could create jobs in the domestic steel industry, but it could also lead to higher prices for companies that use steel, which could hurt their competitiveness and lead to job losses. Farmers often bear the brunt of trade wars, as agricultural products are frequently targeted by tariffs. When countries impose tariffs on food imports, it can disrupt agricultural markets and make it difficult for farmers to sell their products abroad. This can lead to lower prices, reduced income, and even bankruptcies. For example, when China imposed tariffs on American soybeans during a trade war, it severely impacted American soybean farmers, who lost a significant portion of their export market. Governments can also experience mixed results during trade wars. While tariffs can generate revenue in the short term, the long-term economic consequences can outweigh any financial gains. Trade wars can disrupt supply chains, harm economic growth, and damage relationships with trading partners. Governments might also need to provide financial assistance to industries and workers affected by trade wars, which can strain public finances. In many cases, trade wars damage relationships between countries. This can have consequences that extend far beyond trade, making it more difficult for countries to work together on other important issues, such as security, climate change, and global health. In summary, trade wars rarely produce clear winners. While some individuals and businesses might experience temporary gains, the overall impact is often negative, resulting in higher prices for consumers, reduced profits for businesses, job losses, and damaged relationships between countries. The benefits are rarely shared evenly, and the costs often outweigh any potential gains. Chapter 7: The Real Cost of Trade Wars. Trade wars, while seemingly limited to economic measures such as tariffs and quotas, carry far-reaching consequences that extend beyond mere financial calculations. The real cost of trade wars encompasses a wide range of factors, including economic disruption, political tensions, social inequalities, and damage to international cooperation. One of the most immediate and obvious costs of trade wars is economic disruption. Tariffs and quotas disrupt established supply chains, increase production costs, and reduce trade volumes. This can lead to slower economic growth, decreased investment, and higher unemployment. Businesses that rely on imported inputs may struggle to remain competitive, and consumers may face higher prices and fewer choices. For example, consider a scenario where country A imposes tariffs on imported electronics from country B. This could lead to several negative consequences. Electronics manufacturers in country A may face higher costs for imported components, making their products less competitive in global markets. Consumers in country A may have to pay higher prices for electronic devices. Electronics manufacturers in country B may see a decline in exports, leading to job losses. The overall volume of trade between country A and country B will likely decrease, harming both economies. Trade wars can also create political tensions between countries. Tariffs and quotas can be seen as acts of aggression, leading to retaliation and escalating conflicts. This can damage relationships between countries and make it more difficult to cooperate on other important issues. For example, a trade war between two major economies could lead to increased diplomatic tensions and strained political relations, a decline in trust and cooperation on issues such as security and climate change, the formation of new alliances and trade agreements that exclude one or both of the warring countries. Trade wars can exacerbate social inequalities. The negative effects of trade wars tend to disproportionately affect low-income households and workers in vulnerable industries. Higher prices for essential goods can strain household budgets, and job losses can lead to financial hardship and increased poverty. For example, consider a situation where a trade war leads to higher prices for food and clothing. This would have a greater impact on low-income households, who spend a larger portion of their income on these necessities. Similarly, workers in industries that are heavily reliant on exports may be more likely to lose their jobs during a trade war. Trade wars can undermine international cooperation. By prioritizing national interests over global cooperation, they can weaken international organizations and make it more difficult to address shared challenges. This can have long-term consequences for global stability and prosperity. For example, a trade war could weaken the WTO and make it more difficult to resolve trade disputes peacefully. It could also discourage countries from working together on other important issues, such as climate change, global health, and poverty reduction. Some people argue that trade wars can be a form of economic warfare, where one country uses economic measures to harm another country. While trade wars may not involve physical violence, they can have devastating consequences for economies, societies, and international relations. In conclusion, the real costs of trade wars are far-reaching and complex. They encompass economic disruption, political tensions, social inequalities, and damage to international cooperation. These costs should be carefully considered when evaluating trade policy decisions. The focus should always be on finding ways to promote fair and open trade that benefits all countries, rather than resorting to protectionist measures that can lead to trade wars. Chapter 8. Finding a Better Way. Trade wars, as we have explored, present a host of challenges and often lead to undesirable outcomes. They disrupt economies, strain relationships between countries, and negatively impact the lives of ordinary citizens. Given these consequences, it's imperative to explore alternative approaches to resolving trade disputes and fostering a more cooperative and mutually beneficial global trading system. One of the most effective alternatives to trade wars is dialogue and negotiation. Instead of resorting to tariffs and other protectionist measures, countries should engage in open and honest discussions to address their concerns and find mutually agreeable solutions. This involves a willingness to compromise, listen to different perspectives, and seek common ground. For example, if two countries disagree about trade practices, they could establish a joint task force to investigate the issues and identify potential solutions. Hold regular meetings between government officials to discuss trade concerns. Invite representatives from businesses and civil society to participate in the dialogue. Seek mediation from a neutral third party to facilitate negotiations. Working together with other countries through international organizations is also essential. Organizations like the WTO provide a framework for countries to discuss trade issues, negotiate agreements, and resolve disputes peacefully. By participating in these organizations and adhering to their rules, countries can promote a more stable and predictable trading system. One of the key challenges in international trade is addressing unfair trade practices. This includes issues such as subsidies, intellectual property theft, and currency manipulation. Countries should work together to develop and enforce rules that ensure a level playing field and prevent unfair competition. For example, countries could negotiate agreements to limit the use of subsidies that distort trade, strengthen intellectual property protection to prevent the theft of ideas and technologies, work with international financial institutions to address currency manipulation. The global economy is constantly evolving, driven by technological advancements and increasing globalization. This requires countries to adapt their trade policies to reflect these changes. For example, the rise of e-commerce and digital trade presents new opportunities and challenges that need to be addressed through international cooperation. Trade can be a powerful engine for economic growth and development, but it needs to be managed carefully to ensure that the benefits are shared equitably. This means taking steps to protect workers, consumers, and the environment. For example, countries could implement policies to ensure that workers receive fair wages and safe working conditions, enforce environmental regulations to prevent pollution and protect natural resources, support small businesses, and promote entrepreneurship to create jobs and economic opportunities. In conclusion, while trade wars may seem like a quick fix for addressing trade imbalances and protecting domestic industries, they often lead to negative consequences for all involved. A better way forward involves dialogue, cooperation, and a commitment to fair and open trade that benefits all countries and their citizens. This requires a long-term perspective, a willingness to compromise, and a focus on building a more sustainable and inclusive global economy. By working together, countries can harness the power of trade to promote economic growth, reduce poverty, and improve the lives of people around the world. It's not a simple task, but the rewards are well worth the effort. The future depends on finding a better way than fighting. Talking, agreeing, and working together is the only path to a brighter future.